Now get ready for a ride on one of the most incredible motorcycles ever built. The V8 Moto Guzzi from the mid-50s. Bill Lomas, a double world champion for Guzzi from that era, tells us about his days with this amazing machine.
It was thought of in September '54. They had a conference with Fergus Anderson and Carcano, and Anderson says, why not make a four-cylinder like Gilera? And Carcano said, well, if we make a four-cylinder, we can only make it equal possibly to Gilera in a year or two. He said, we ought to think forward. This is, I think, a V8's the answer, because everyone was a bit silent then. Anyway, they did some rough drawings and started production of the engine in about the end of September '54. And the engine was ready on the test bench in January '55. And the first time they ran it up, it gave 62 brake horsepower at 10,000 revs. They had a bike completed to run round Monza at the end of March '55. And the first time I rode it was after I'd won the World Championship in '55. Anderson said to Carcano, let Bill have a ride on it, because it had never gone quick because Ken didn't seem to want to. So I had it at Monza, and I found out it was bad carbureting out of Lesmo curves. Well, at that time we didn't have 8 float chambers, we had 2 float chambers on the side. Well, I said it's pretty rich coming out of the right hand corner, drop the float chambers. Oh, we can't do it. But anyway, they did. They dropped them about 2 to 3 millimeters, and it cleaned the carburation up straight away. Well, within 5 laps, having never ridden it before, I was down to within a second of the lap record. Of course, it pleased them no end, and that's how I started my association with the V8. In the spring of '57, that was the motorcycle show in Rome. So Moto Guzzi thought they ought to put some record attempt on somewhere, so they got the permit from the police to use the old Appian Way, south of Rome, that goes across the Pontine Marshes. It's a very narrow road, but it's very straight for about 15 miles. There's a drainage ditch either side, and the police said, well, we must have 2 motor lodges either side for if somebody goes off the road to fish us out, you see. Improved my confidence a lot, you see. I had one run up with the 8, which Carcano calculated to gear proper gear, and I came back as well as it's over everything about 12.6, 12.8. He said, I can't believe it, Bill. You said, hey, Bill, you know. I said, well, you ought to put at least one more tooth on the gearbox final drive sprocket. So I said, oh, I don't think. Anyway, I convinced them it was possible. So they put it on, I just had one run, and that was the record, 153 mile an hour, 154 mile an hour. And the last kilometre, officially, you've seen the time, 178.5 miles an hour, 40 years ago.
So let's join Bill now as he sets off from the TT grandstand.
The motorcycle that Bill Lomas is riding here is one of the rarest machines in the world. The 500cc V8 Moto Guzzi is the only 8-cylinder motorcycle ever made. As Bill explained, Guzzi was struggling to compete with Gilera and MV in the late 50s and decided to answer their multi-cylinder rivals with this amazing machine. Please don't expect any fireworks on this lap though. This bike is worth over £250,000. It's one of only a handful remaining in the world, it's over 40 years old, and Bill himself is in his late 60s. Also, this is a parade lap. However, it's such an interesting and historically significant machine that we felt we just had to include it here. This is the only time that onboard footage has ever been filmed on the TT circuit from a V8 Guzzi, and it's quite possible that it will also be the last. And whilst you're not going to see the machine reach its incredible top speed of nearly 180 miles per hour, or scream out to its maximum of nearly 13,000 revs per minute, you will be able to imagine just how awesome it must have seemed to the crowds of the day. One of the few remaining V8 Guzzis is owned by a Mr. Todaro, whose father was one of the original Guzzi engineers responsible for designing and building the V8. Todaro Jr. was following Bill on the lap you're watching now, and riding the only other Guzzi V8 still running. As this next shot shows, you might have been better advised to leave the actual riding of such a motorcycle to the professionals. You'll be pleased to know that Tadaro was not hurt in that accident. It's safe to say, however, that both his pride and his bank balance sustained considerable amounts of damage.